Good afternoon and welcome to the ABA YLD Women of Color Task Forces program titled En Route to the Bench, Demystifying Pathways to the Judiciary. My name is Janey, Lamar, and I will be your moderator for today's program. Today, our panel of judges will discuss their unique journeys to the bench and the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the judiciary. I would like to acknowledge our sponsors, which include the Women of Color Task Force and the ABA Judicial Division. Before we begin with our panel, I would also like to introduce the Women of Color Task Force. I, along with Heather Horn, are the co-chairs of the task force. Our vice chair is Mary Magdalene C. Onyango. Our task force members include Nan Ho, Christina Hornsby, and Jessica Perez. The special advisor to the Women of Color Task Force is Professor Daiquiri Steele. The task force seeks to examine the experiences of women of color in the legal profession, identify and effectively address the unique challenges they face, and provide them with tools to build community. Now I'll introduce our panel of judges to begin our program. Judge Chandra W. Baker Robinson is a circuit court judge in Wayne County 3rd Judicial Circuit Court. Judge Baker Robinson was elected to the bench during November 2020 and assumed the bench in January 2021. Prior to serving on the bench, Judge Baker Robinson was a lead attorney heading the Arson Reduction Unit in Wayne County's prosecutor's office. Our next panelist is Judge J. Michelle Childs. Judge J. Michelle Childs is a United States District Judge for the District of South Carolina and was appointed to the bench in August 2010. Judge Childs previously served as a South Carolina at-large circuit court judge. Before her judgeships, Judge Childs was a workers' compensation commissioner and the Deputy Director for the South Carolina Department of Labor, Licensing, and Regulations Division of Labor. Our next panelist is Judge Diane J. Humetewa. Judge Humetewa is a United States District Judge in the United States District Court for the District of Arizona. Judge Humetewa was appointed in May 2014. Prior to her judgeship, Judge Humetewa served as a special advisor to the president and special counsel in the Office of General Counsel at Arizona State University. She also served as a professor of practice at Arizona State University's Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. And lastly, we have Justice Elizabeth M. Welch, who is an Associate Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. Justice Welch joined the Michigan Supreme Court in January 2021. Prior to Justice Welch joining the Michigan Supreme Court, she had her own private practice and was an experienced mediator. Thank you all for being here today. We'll start with our first question. What is the process of becoming a judge? And Judge Humetewa, I will start that question with you.
Yes, and good morning, everyone. And I'm very happy to be on this panel of distinguished presenters. Well, as many of you know, the United States Constitution for federal judgeships provides in Article 2, Section 2, the process by which it begins. Basically, it is the president's prerogative to nominate, but with the advice and consent of the Senate. And what that means generally today is whoever the United States senators are for the home state where there is a vacancy, they generally have their own processes. For many years, for example, here in Arizona, it was the prerogative of the senior senator of the state of Arizona to determine who it is that they wish to vet for these positions. In more recent years, a committee process has generally been established by the senators, working together with local well-known lawyers to accept applications and to interview those who are interested, and then come together to determine who would be the best people to nominate for these positions. So I think it is a very state-by-state specific process these days. Of course, once the nomination is made, and actually before the time that the president decides to nominate the individual, then there's this really rigorous vetting process that goes on, both with regard to the Senate Judiciary Committee, who has the jurisdiction to go through the confirmation process with the nominee, as well as a vigorous FBI background investigation in terms of the person's conduct, whether or not the person has paid taxes, and so on and so forth. And so it's a pretty intense process. And then ultimately, you will get a Senate confirmation hearing, go before a full body of the Senate, answer questions about whatever is revealed in those background clearance applications, as well as the Senate Judiciary questionnaire. And then ultimately, they will determine whether or not you get voted out of committee. And then the next process going forward is, of course, the floor vote by all of the senators. And so it is a very rigorous and daunting process, at least for the federal portion. And it sometimes can take a year, if not more.
Thank you for that, Judge Humetewa. Judge Childs, can you speak to the process for the federal bench as well?
I'll also give you a little bit of insight into our South Carolina Circuit Court bench, and I'll start there because I was a Circuit Court judge before I came onto the federal bench. There, we are one of the few states, I believe it's just South Carolina and possibly Virginia, that actually gets elected by our General Assembly. And so with respect to it going through the legislature, you have to apply to be a judge, and then you'll go through a Senate Judicial Qualifications Committee interview, a citizens interview, a South Carolina bar interview, and then also at that time, it's no longer the time here, we had to take a test. We reviewed a year's worth of decisions by our South Carolina Supreme Court, so that could be on the test, as well as evidence, civil and criminal procedure, and then any judicial canons, procedures in that regard. We would have that interview, and then they would only report 3 out. There happened to be 6 in my race, but they only report 3 out. And then there's a time period at which you can actually gain commitment from the legislature. So at the time, by the time we got through commitment, and I had spoken with several legislatures, you're actually going to their meetings, you go to receptions, you meet them in the garage, you try to get visits with their office. So I call it the shoe leather campaign because we have to do so much in that regard. But you do all of that, and then eventually you make it to a vote. And I was fortunate enough that I had garnered enough votes to where I got voted in by acclamation because there was no one else in the race. Last candidate had pulled out a week before. In this process, generally speaking, in many of the states, there is a merit selection commission. We don't have that in South Carolina. We're a very small state, and I was very fortunate enough that I got asked to consider being a federal judge while I was on the state bench. And I, thought it was quite an honor, but I also felt like after the President Obama got into office that you would repay people who had, given money to campaigns or who were very political. And as a judge, I could be neither. So I basically was asked to turn in my resume. They underground vetted me. And then eventually I got a letter that said that I had been nominated. And then I went through that process that Judge Humetewa is telling us about, and absolutely incredible because you're meeting with White House counsel, Department of Justice, actually in the plane ride from the trip once I landed in DC to go for my Senate confirmation hearing to get prepped. They had told me about all this information that I had not revealed. Comes to find out, it was very small little quotes that perhaps were in a paper from something you did like 10 years ago, and a bunch of things that weren't really there. And then some of it was a different Michelle Child. So then there's that. But it's definitely a very intense process. It feels like you're on an obstacle course and you just constantly have more information, more interviews and things of that nature. But everybody has always told me, if you're able to do any of this and this is what you want, do not give up because there is a strong reward on the other side.
Certainly. And
thank you again for the opportunity to be amongst you all.
Absolutely. Those are for sure intense processes. Justice Welch, can you talk to us a little bit about what happens with the process for becoming a justice?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having me and inviting me among this fascinating group of women who have achieved amazing things. Judge Childs, like that is fascinating. I had no idea about South Carolina for state court judges. Like that is a rigorous process. So congratulations to you for navigating it. And then of course, doing the federal process, which many of my friends have done as well. So some of whom are in the middle of it right now. So Michigan is interesting. We do elect all of our state court judges. Judge Baker Robertson is on and she will follow me. So I'm just going to talk about the Supreme Court because she is also in Michigan. And interestingly, it's her, you know, where she ran for judge, you know, we have district court, circuit court, court of appeals, and then Supreme Court. All the rules that she's going to talk about apply to everybody except the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court, the parties actually nominate the candidates to run, and then you run nonpartisan. So it's this fascinating process where I did live a very political life in my past life. I was very, very involved in helping folks get elected and helping them with campaigns and strategies and all of that. So I had that, you know, for about 20 years of my life. And step forward to run. I was not a judge first. Obviously, that is a pathway for a lot of people, but we've had an interesting change in the last decade in Michigan where many of us on the court were not judges first. You know, we were practitioners and maybe very involved with the legislature or the governor's office or a different branch of government. So, so I had that background and was, you know, took a look at running. And so as Judge Childs talked about, you know, the shoe leather part, I had to run a statewide campaign. So I was in every single room, first in person for about 4 months and then virtually on Zoom for about 4 months and then a hybrid for the last couple months. But I was truly zigzagging the state 4 to 5 different groups every single day, you know, trying to secure the party's nomination. Then once I received the nomination, it turns into a general campaign where the voters decide. And so there's this strange needle threading where we are the nonpartisan branch of government, but I am running, you know, in my case, I was nominated by the Democratic Party. So just a interesting, you know, way to do things where you have sort of the infrastructure of the party behind you, but you're the nonpartisan person who's part of that. So that is a whole interesting journey that could be room for a whole nother conversation. But so that's how we do it in Michigan. And then the voters ultimately do decide.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Justice Welch. And Judge Baker Robertson, we'll have you speak to your process. You're on mute, Judge.
Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry. Good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to the distinguished panelists, and thank you so much for having me. As Justice Welch indicated, I ran for circuit court. First thing you have to do is you have to get the amount of signatures required in order to get on the ballot. And so that's the first step. And in Wayne County, I had to get 4,000 signatures, which actually started off not too bad of a process until the shutdown came in March of 2020. And I only had about 3,000 signatures at the time. You need 4,000, but of course, there are going to be signatures that will not be valid because there are people who you tell them that they need to live in Wayne County and be registered to vote in Wayne County. And then there are people who live in Wayne County, but are using insurance addresses in other counties, which then their signatures are no longer valid. So people sign your petition. So you have to account for a certain percentage of them that are not going to go well. So generally we're told to get double, which is about 8,000. They usually tell you to fall about 6,000. I will tell you when the shutdown took place, I actually turned in about 4,700. So that was very close. I literally had 90% good signatures. And my route is that I went to churches. A lot of churches will allow you to get signatures. They won't tell the people to get the signatures. They'll just inform them. May let you speak. And then they'll say, you know, if you want to sign or petition, that's fine. And so that was a huge route for me. I have an aversion to cold weather. So being outside at supermarkets, I mean, but you have to do all that. I went to the Eastern market. I mean, when we start to run, it's November. So we're outside. We were outside at the Secretary of State's office, because generally those people are registered. They're in there getting their license. So you've got to get the signatures first. Once you get the signatures and you get on the ballot, and mind you, I was also challenged. So once you're on the ballot, other opponents may try to challenge you, especially if your signatures are close. And so there were 2 of us that were challenged. My signatures held up, her signatures held up. And so now we're at the process of running. And which is very interesting, as Justice Welch indicated, it is a nonpartisan position. However, if you do not have the money to finance your own campaign, you've got to connect with somebody, because there's no way that you can knock on the doors for 34 cities in the county of Wayne. So you have to connect with the state reps. You have to connect with a party who's going to put your, they're going to vet you and then make a decision if they're going to support you. And then when they put out their slate, that's free advertising. So what you have to look at is who's going to put boots on the ground, who's going to give you money, and who's going to give you free advertising. You have to go to unions and get endorsed by unions, because they send out a paper to their people, and you get thousands of votes that way, people you will never meet. Because again, you cannot knock on the doors. It's not the same kind of race as if you're running in one city. So you almost have to align yourself with a party in order to win a nonpartisan race. So, that part is a little daunting, especially in this past race. It was very divisive. I actually received a call from the other party indicating they wanted to support me because they felt that I was qualified. I honestly could not take the support, because I was told if I had done that, I would have lost the other support, which I heavily needed. So there's a lot of political landmines that you have to walk around. And for me, who had never really been political at all, I had to make a lot of calls in order to find out what am I supposed to do and what am I not supposed to do. So that is the process. And then, once you make it past the primary, there were 6 people, there were 2 spots, double the amount of spots, make it past the primary, so 4 of us. And then you head to the general, and then that's the election.
Awesome. Thank you all for sharing those processes, as it is extremely helpful to know the differences between appointments and elections at these different levels in the judiciary. And so what experiences inspired you to become a judge? And we'll start with Justice Welch.
Sure, thank you. As I said, I ascended to the Supreme Court. I was not a judge first, which the traditional pathway certainly has been that, but we've seen a shift in our state where we have a blend, which I think has worked really well. So my motivation for this particular office to step forward was largely because I'm actually someone who believes government can be a force for tremendous good. And I had been in spaces where I was advocating for positive changes, as far as like public schools. And I was at the Capitol a lot working on public school issues in our state, as well as voting rights and legislation. So I spent about 20 years, wearing that hat, whether it was part of my law practice or my non-billable hours for those of us who had to bill hours. That was a big part of my life. I also, another part of my life was deep involvement in nonprofits, which a lot of us have that background. It's just sort of in the lawyer DNA, particularly the women lawyer DNA. And I had the privilege of serving on a foundation board. And I was watching the shift that was happening among foundations, where they too were asking the questions about systems and policy. And if we're really going to solve a problem, government does have to be part of that solution. These problems are huge. courts were simultaneously starting to have this discussion. And this is before even 2020 hit. We in Michigan were starting to examine some issues around criminal justice, and there were task forces underway studying best practices and starting to begin to gather data. And that all overlapped with the world I was in, wearing a different hat, but asking the exact same questions. You know, how do our systems serve those? Are they really serving our communities in the best way? So I was really excited at this opportunity because the court, the Supreme Court and our court administrator's office was really shifting its focus to really look at the judiciary as an entity that can actually solve problems. There were some, I think, new justices, particularly our Chief Justice, who was elected in 2012, who she cares a lot about this. And I was really privileged to run alongside her on this sort of platform of being there to affect positive changes. And so that really was a huge motivator. I realized that those skills from 20 years of sort of fighting for system change, they indeed directly transfer into the court system, which is, there's no bigger, more complex system. So I find myself deep in that work and I absolutely love it. And it's a privilege to be doing it.
Thank you for that, Justice Welch. Judge Baker Robinson, how about you? What experiences inspired you?
Well, I would probably have to say I started off in civil doing labor and employment at a large law firm. And then I moved over to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, a complete shift, to do criminal work. And I always wanted to do criminal work. And I will indicate that when I started, my focus was pretty much on the victim because there had been people in my family who had been victims of crime. However, once I started working at the prosecutor's office, I realized the amount of influence the prosecutors have with respect to not only the victims, but the defendants, and being able to be just and work out a solution that will allow people to grow and not necessarily incarcerate. And with my particular cases, as I rose up through the ranks and became a supervisor, I had a lot more say-so in the offers that were made. And that at that point motivated me to want to be involved, not in just my own cases, but a larger amount of cases and being involved in individuals that come before me. And so that was my motivation to become judge, because as a supervisor of the arson department, of course I had to say so with those cases, but being a judge, now I have some say so and some input and can direct lives of all the people that come before me. And it has been my pleasure to see individuals' lives change already, to programs that I've sent them to. I've had defendants, I haven't even been on the bench a year yet, but I've had defendants come back and say, my whole life has changed that you sent me to this program. I'm so glad I went to this program. And, you know, I've got a job now. You know, I require people to come before me to get a GED. I won't even let you off probation. Of course, I have to at some point, but, you know, no, we're going to extend it until you get the GED because it makes you more marketable. And here are your numbers for jobs. There are jobs out here. And I want to see you back in 3 months. And that's what I'm doing in this courtroom. That's what I choose to do. And I'm also over one of the judges over the drug court. So I get an opportunity to deal with individuals that have substance abuse problems as well and help them out as well. So that was my motivation, because I want to see lives change. And that was my motivation for running for judge.
Thank you for that, Judge Baker Robinson. Judge Childs, how about you?
Thank you, and I'll align myself with Judges Welch and Baker Robinson. I'm actually from Detroit, Michigan. And then I'd also state that I did labor and employment law in a large firm as well. And my undergrad is management, and my master's is personnel and employment relations that I did with my law degree. And so I've always been one who loved efficiencies in the system as well. When I ran Division of Labor, I had 100 people under me, ran 6 programs, and I believe that the government was here to help you. So when I was going around the state, I was trying to make sure that people did not have to confront the government without the government trying to assist them with their OSHA problems in terms of safety and occupational health, labor management mediation, wages and child labor, things of that nature. As I came on to the state court system, I used all of that efficiency that I learned about in management, because our docket, just like South Carolina, is very special, very different. The prosecutor would generally run the docket instead of the cases just being set by the clerk of court. And it became very inefficient in terms of who lawyers having to wait around in courtrooms 4 and 5 hours just to get a guilty plea in. The jail was overcrowded, so I worked with the warden. And when I became chief judge of criminal court, our jail was local jail, just in this one county, was 200 over capacity. By the time I finished, it was 200 under capacity, because I learned to make the prosecutors and the defense counsel actually work together, determine who deserved time served, who deserved probation, and perhaps who should get a negotiated plea. And then that would make people who would otherwise wait 4 months to get a sentence that would say time served, and they really should have been on probation, things of that nature. And so those were some of my concerns, that we are in charge. It takes a little more effort administratively, but if it's much more efficient, and then that puts a great perception on the courts that we are fair and impartial, but we also believe in the just and inexpensive determination of our various action as we as judges become judicial gatekeepers for the management of the system. So I guess I would just say affecting lives as well, aligned with Judge Baker Robinson. I started our bridge court, we call it bridge court instead of drug court, to provide options and alternatives to sentencing as well, and taking on the human aspect of what occurs in court as well.
Thank you, Judge Childs. And Judge Humetewa, how about you and your experiences? You're on mute, Judge.
The experiences that inspired me to become a judge, it's a difficult question for me, because when I reflect upon that question, I could say honestly that I could not envision for myself becoming a judge, at least here in Arizona. And it's sort of an interesting story, because I predominantly practiced as an assistant U.S. attorney. So I was in court, in federal court, almost every day. But it wasn't until I was approached with the opportunity to possibly become the U.S. attorney back in about 2006. And so I had to go home and discuss this with my husband about the potential for being nominated to the U.S. attorney's position, which was vacant at the time. And his immediate response to me was, if it will help you eventually get to a federal judge position, I think you should do it. That was the first time anyone had ever said anything like that to me. Now imagine I was working in the federal courts, and every day we would walk down this gallery of portraits. And I was used to the judges that I practiced before. I thought they were very learned judges, but not a single one of them had similar traits as I did. They were all generational lawyers. They were all very politically connected. Some had come from the state court bench. And certainly I didn't see myself in that trajectory because of, so many obstacles that really I hadn't even thought about, getting through. So it was a very long and arduous process for me. It wasn't until much later that I saw the first woman federal district court judge, and then a supervisor of mine actually in about 2001 became the first Hispanic federal district judge. And I think after that, and then my husband's comments about, I guess seeing something in me that I had not yet seen in myself, that was really kind of what started me thinking about this might be a possibility.
Awesome. And your experiences all are very inspiring and impactful. And so let's talk more specifically about your paths to the bench. We'll start with Judge Baker Robinson for this question. Judge Baker Robinson, what was your specific path to the bench, and what made you decide to take the opportunity to become a judge?
Well, as I indicated earlier, my path was running. You can ascend to this position either by running or by an appointment. I had gone out for an appointment, but I will be honest, I was not political at all. I did a lot of community service, but it generally was through nonprofits or either through church, and I wasn't very political. And I will indicate, even when I began, I called myself running because I wasn't political, which is really ironic because you have to still be political to run, but I had no clue. Even getting out, when I first started out, I had people say, well, we've not seen you before, and we don't know anything about you. And so that was the challenge that I had, is that I had to make a name for myself, having no political connections, as Judge has been stated previously by a couple of judges. No generational lawyers. I didn't come from a family of lawyers. No money in the respect that you need in order to run, just, government lawyer. And so honestly, it was faith, a lot of faith. I honestly believe that this was the time that my God was telling me to run. And so I stepped out on that faith, because I actually ended up running against someone that had a very strong political name. And I was just able to go out and meet people, and people liked me and they liked what I had to say. And I ended up getting endorsements everywhere I went. And that is what allowed me to make it to this place, because like I said, I had no political connections at all to speak of. And I had about $2,000 when it started. And I was told that this race was about a $100,000 race. And I could have, at that point, I honestly wanted to give up after I was told that. But I just said in my heart, you know what? If people like you, they'll give money to you, you'll figure it out, and you'll just go step by step. And that's what I did. I just did step by step. So I am truly, I will tell anybody, if this is what you want to do, don't be daunted by, whatever the challenges are. If it's meant to be, it'll work out for you, as it has for me.
And Judge Baker Robertson, I don't want to put you on the spotlight, but can you tell the audience a little bit about the result of the election? Can you tell us about that?
Okay, so this was, I called myself doing due diligence, because as I indicated before, I did not have a name or no political connections. So I went to a family here who, the family is actually, I know the family and I practice in front of the family, and they're great people. They have quite a few people on the bench. And I had gone to them and I said, is anybody from your family running for this spot? And they said, no, all of our family's on the bench. The last people that are left are little kids, fine. So I decided I'm going to get in this race because this name is not present in this race. After I get in the race, Justice, who's one of my colleagues, Honorable Mary Beth Kelly, who used to be on the Michigan Supreme Court, so you can't say she's not qualified, decided to come back to the court. And there were 2 spots. So it's automatic, she's going to take one. So now we're left with 1 spot. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got a chance. It's just 1 spot. And everybody else has a regular name, nobody else. And then as someone who did not have a political name, but is married to someone who did, he changed his name to his wife's name right before the election, and then ran with this political name. So of course, now everybody's saying, well, sorry, because, you'll get the experience, but this is a name. But unfortunately, the news picked it up, and actually it did not work well for him, because the news basically said, are you trying to fool the voters? This was not your name for 30 ever plus years of your life. And so the press was not good for him, but it's still a political name. And so when the election took place, he won the election by about 300 and some votes. But I still felt in my spirit it wasn't over. I didn't know what was going to happen. I don't know. I just really believed something was going to happen. And it was the unofficial count. Never has the unofficial count changed. Usually they just certify whatever the other unofficial count is. 2 weeks later, when they certified it, my race was the only race in Michigan that flipped, and he was not declared the winner. I was then declared the winner by 300 and some votes. So they said they had never seen that happen before. I was literally a loser for 2 weeks. I never even got a call to tell me I won. He was just called and told he had not won. So he had to go back to the position that he had. And then I was told that I was judge. And then it just came up on once they certified it, which that was a big deal because they didn't want to certify Michigan. It was that was a federal issue with the presidency, but that held up Michigan's certification. And then when they finally certified Michigan, we switched places. I was number 3, and then I became number 2, and I became judge 2 weeks later after the election. And the issue was that city of Detroit was still being counted. And when they made an unofficial count, they really had so many people from the city of Detroit had voted absentee. And they hadn't been counted, and which was, I was wondering how we had a count when the presidential count was not complete and everything is on the same ballot. But so once they finished the presidential count, it flipped, and I ended up winning after I was declared the loser.
Congratulations, Judge Baker Robinson. Truly inspiring story. And so I had to get that in there for our audience. Justice Welch, how about you? What was your path and what made you decide to take the opportunity?
Yeah, and I'm so glad Judge Baker Robinson shared that story. She and I were on the campaign trail. I actually met Chandra. I remember exactly the first time I met her because I had a statewide campaign. So I was over in Metro Detroit pretty much every day. I live 2 hours west in Grand Rapids, but I had the privilege of being over there all the time, still am over there all the time. And I had a deputy campaign manager who knew Detroit. She was amazing, and with me all the time. And she was talking a whole bunch about Chandra, she'd heard. And so I kept wanting to meet her. And I remember once I met her, I knowing she had not had this political prior life, but it was a privilege to get to validate when people asked questions. So, because I was in those circles. So that's, I had spent so much of my time helping amazing women sort of navigate the political morass of Michigan and understand how it works. Because if you do want to get this position, whether you're elected or appointed, you do have to figure that out. And I just kudos to Judge Baker Robinson. She did a great job. So as I shared, I had a very political life, and I spent a lot of time encouraging people to step forward and run. I mean, all the way from school boards and local city commissions, all the way up to Senate and, governor. So I was really involved. And if you've done politics long enough, 20, 30 years, you eventually are friends with a lot of people who, keep moving up, which is fantastic. So that's really exciting. It's one of the joys of being involved for so long. I was one of those women who was constantly asking other people to run and encouraging them and helping them figure out how to raise money and fundraising plans and all the things you have to do that are normally barriers. But I was also, as Judge Humetewa said, I had people also asking me to run, and I kept doing what I think so many women do, which is I'm really better behind the scenes. I really love helping all these other people, and I'm part of the team, and I was, and I had it was very rewarding. In 2008-9, I had an opportunity, our then Governor Granholm, several people, there was a vacancy. So Judge Baker Robinson talked about that you can get elected, that's when the seat's open, but sometimes there's a midterm vacancy. Someone steps down or passes away before their term is up. And the governor does fill those. That is hugely advantageous to the person because once you get the appointment, when you have to run to keep the seat, you get the judge designation before your name. So it's a huge advantage. So a lot of people hope to just get the appointment because then you don't have to run a big rigorous campaign like Judge Baker Robinson had to, which is a lot of work and money. So I did have an opportunity to fill a spot quite a while ago. My father was actually in the hospital then dying of cancer. And I was regularly helping him and flying back and forth to MD Anderson in Houston. And the timing was terrible. And so I did take a pass on it at that point in my life. So that was when the first seeds of sort of stepping forward and people encouraging me to step forward happened. So it was always there. But ultimately, I shared the pathway. Now, I want to just say another really interesting thing about this call that I did not know before this call. Judge Childs, Judge Baker Robinson, and I all have one huge thing in common. We all started out doing management side labor employment law in our careers. That is wild. So it is interesting because I do think there's this element of efficiency and best practices, and it's sort of just part of who we are. And we definitely bring those skills with us. So I just thought that's a fascinating, because I don't meet many judges that have that background. So I've got 3 of them on this call, so.
Awesome, thank you, Justice Welch. And we'll pass the question to Judge Childs.
Yes, at the time that I became a circuit court judge, I was actually a workers' comp commissioner. And there was an issue that was happening in one of the legislature's district about us hiring somebody. And this brings in my labor and employment law background, because we put up the qualifications for the position and we indicated we would only take someone who had a bachelor's degree. However, apparently word got around that we were interviewing people who only had high school education. And of course, my antenna went up and said, we can't be sued over this. If that's what we put up as the position qualification, that's all what we'll deal with. I did not know the individuals who were interviewing. I did not vouch for anyone, but I said, I will make sure that we are following our criteria. And so that particular legislature was impressed that I just handled the situation, very neutrally in that regard. And then when a position came open, she actually called me and said, you need to consider running for judge. And I hadn't thought about it at that point in the career because I was in a term of my own for a workers' comp commission. So I did decide to go. And then of course you have to get legislatures to help you. And she was one of the ones who became one of my floor leaders in that regard. Insofar as this position is concerned, at the time I was on circuit court, I was chief judge of business court, as well as chief judge of general sessions, which is our criminal court. And I was on maternity leave. And I just randomly got a call from a congressman's office through his chief of staff, asking me would I consider running for judge, because my name, apparently there were several positions open. And again, my intent was not over here. I was, doing the work I was doing and enjoying my newborn daughter. And then it just came up, and then I just, again, sent the resume in, and then things started following course with an underground vetting and eventually making it to this position. So there are different ways to go about it, but I really feel like the way my story folds out is don't underestimate just hard work, and then the opportunity for people to notice that work, but then to also be available to do more work to get what is ever necessary to fill out these applications, attend your interviews, and do other things in that regard. Because obviously, and I'm sure you'll get to this a little later, you have to resume build as well. There's a lot of things that you'll need to be there to be that qualified applicant where somebody wants to look at you and give you that opportunity.
Awesome, thank you for that, Judge Childs. And Judge Humetewa?
Well, so after I did eventually take on the U.S. Attorney position, obviously you serve at the pleasure of the president. And so when the change of election came about, I had to leave the position. And so I went then into private practice and then was brought on as one of my clients to work at Arizona State University. It was roughly about 2010 when I got a call one day. I really vividly remember it. I was pumping gas and I get this call on my cell phone, and it's a gentleman from one of these national organizations, predominantly Native American advocacy organizations. And he asks me about my interest in being considered for a federal judgeship, and my ears perked up. And I said, yes, I would be interested, and tell me, what it is that you're thinking about. And apparently they were working with some arm of the White House to identify potential Native American candidates to fill some of these vacancies. And it was the first time I had heard about this. And I was very interested, but I was also very cautious because I didn't quite know really the level of confidence that I could put in the question and then the process at that point. But I certainly had missed being in the courtroom after practicing for that period of time. So once I got that phone call, it was sort of radio silence then, and you just sort of go about your business and continue to work. And what I learned later was there was a little bit of a difficulty in terms of bringing my name forward because the president at the time was President Obama. And as you will recall, he ran against my first boss as a lawyer, Senator John McCain. And so they were not the best of friends at that point. And so I think that's probably what it was, a non-starter. But it definitely gave me, it set a seed in my mind about the potential and to really think about getting myself ready for the opportunity. I felt confident in my experiences as a practitioner, and then having the experience as a private law attorney. So I felt very ready, but I also knew that I had to continue to work hard and build my resume, as Judge Childs mentions. And so I just sort of tried to stay focused and ready for that next call. And obviously that next call came a couple of years later. And at that point, I felt very ready for the opportunity.
Sorry, thank you for that, Judge Humetewa. I'm glad to learn about all of your paths to the bench, which all differed greatly. And I believe you've all shared in answering the question, and that'll encourage our audience to further consider pursuing the judiciary. Judge Childs, what was the biggest challenge for you during the process of becoming a judge?
The bigger challenge is just not being familiar with the process, and then having to kind of pair yourself with people and go and look for others who have gone through the process. Because the bigger issue, particularly on the state court issue, is getting to know the legislature. And some will want to talk to you, some may not want to talk to you. Getting yourself the opportunity to introduce yourself to people, because again, I was not politically active, at the time. So trying to find legislators that you can align with, who would believe in you, who would actually sponsor you at the appropriate time. So that was a lot of the issue. Not so much on paperwork and preparing for interviews and doing things of that nature, because you can get with your friends and some mentors to work on that part. But I think just getting myself involved politically with the process when you were apolitical, essentially, in terms of, voting, of course, and doing things of that nature, but not running campaigns, not aligning with any particular party, things of that nature. It was just a different process, understanding that as much merit as you think you may have, politics will play a substantial role in the ultimate decision.
Thank you for that, Judge Childs. And Justice Welch, how about you?
Yeah, I think part of the barrier for me was, when several people came to me and asked me to consider looking at this, was I actually did know what was required because I had helped so many people navigate the process. So sometimes people jump in and they'll say like a year later, wow, if I'd known, I'm not sure I'd do it. I actually did know. I knew that my life would have to dramatically change for a year. And we can talk more about that when we get into sort of barriers for entry, which I think that is one of the barriers, particularly for statewide office. So just mentally figuring out how to manage a law practice that was still ongoing, regular life, and manage a statewide campaign, it's a lot. And so I really had to plan for that. And it took a lot of work to do that. The other thing, which was a unique thing, was the pandemic year, which obviously Judge Baker Robinson understands completely. I had plans. I had, campaign infrastructure, 3 staff, whole bunch of interns, and plans to literally drive back and forth from mostly Detroit every day, and needed a driver to help because I also had to do work and all that and calls. And when the world, it is so surreal to look back. The night before the whole state shut down, I was at, I think 2 nights before, I was at a huge event, like a laborers convention. A bunch of the trade unions were all in one room. I mean, hundreds of people. Everybody was like, I think they knew something was upon us. It was this weird energy. Everybody kind of stopped shaking hands. I mean, no masks yet, lots of hand sanitizer, and we left, and it was 2 days later, the whole world shut down. I actually, I was still practicing employment law, working with a whole bunch of clients. I had some of the longest hours of my entire career, helping them navigate the emergency orders and, restaurants and healthcare professions, all the different professions that were impacted. I had to help them navigate that. So things did come to a pretty screeching halt on the campaign for maybe a month. Everybody moved to Zoom. They weren't moving to Zoom yet. They were rescheduling. And I remember saying, are you sure? I'm not sure this is going to just be a month. Have you heard of Zoom? I had used Zoom a whole bunch for other committees I served on. And the world just wasn't there yet. And then so at about the 8-week mark, everything started moving to Zoom. And then it became 5 to 10 to 12 Zooms back to back to back every single night, which had its upside. I reached so many voters all over the state. Michigan's a very big state geographically. Our Upper Peninsula is a 10-hour drive from my house. So there were upsides for sure, but downsides to the lack of energy of a crowd. When you're running a statewide campaign, you want that too. So that was an interesting challenge that we all navigated, anybody who was running in 2020.
Thank you, Justice Welch. And Judge Baker Robinson, how about you?
Yeah, I won't take a lot of time on that. I'll just have to piggyback on Justice Welch. I mean, we ran at the same time. And so that was the biggest challenge, raising money in a pandemic. You really can't meet in person. And I had to do my fundraiser over Zoom. You don't get as many people. I had to try to make it lively. So it's not just, looking at somebody and giving you money. So, I booked talent and actually had a DJ, we had a comedian. I mean, I tried to make it so people would at least want to log in and feel like they're getting something because they're hors d'oeuvres and all, the normal shoulder rubbing. So trying to raise money in the pandemic, trying to just campaign in the pandemic. But as Justice Welch indicated, it did have upsides. I have 2 teenagers who I was able to be at home with and also follow up on and go to a meeting and interview and Zoom out and deal with them and Zoom back in. But it still has in getting the signatures in a pandemic as well, because nobody wanted to touch you. I literally remember trying to hand somebody my clipboard and they told me to throw it on the ground. And I threw it on the ground and they used their own pen and they signed it. And then they threw it back on the other side of the grass. And at that point, I realized, okay, and this is across the street from my house. So these are people that I know. They were the neighbors. So I thought, okay, going door to door is not going to work. So yeah, you had to be creative. And so it costs more too, because you had to get other people involved in helping you get these signatures. And everybody doesn't want to get out in a pandemic. So yes, that was the challenge, running in a pandemic.
Thank you. And Judge Humetewa.
I think Judge Child mentioned some of this in talking about the process. It really was the process itself. Well, in the first instance, as I mentioned, I was sort of shelved as an idea in terms of becoming a judge. And then once I got the call for sure, and the interesting part about this is in about 2010, when I got that call, the process was different. The senior senator of our state had the prerogative and exercised the prerogative for many years to do his own vetting and select his own nominees to share with the White House. He retired, and then we have a new senator now, and he established a vetting committee. And this is the first time in many, many years in Arizona that a committee was established that took applications for the open position. And this was a committee, I believe, of 8 lawyers, well-known in the community. And so, number one, you had to fill out the application process, which very much mirrored the Senate Judiciary questionnaire, which is very daunting. And it really that is sort of one of the first exercises that you go through to really put pen to paper, to put your experiences down to see if you yourself feel qualified. And then you have to wait to see if you're going to get an interview. And then you have to go into an interview with, you know, all of these individuals who are very, very experienced lawyers asking you different questions. And then it really is, once you get out of that process and you're being seriously considered, filling out more forms, and sort of this hurry up and wait sort of situation where you fill out a form, you submit it, and then you get a call. Can you further elaborate on question, you know, 7 or what, you know, and then radio silence for another several weeks. And you don't know what's happening until then you get a call. Can you come into the White House and meet with the lawyers there? You have that interview and you don't really leave there understanding what's going to happen next. And it's really just a very emotionally draining process. At some point, you sort of forget about the process. You think, well, I'm shelved again, but then you'll get another call. And so it really is sort of this roller coaster, and it really is very daunting. And at the end, of course, it's all worth it. But when you go through it, sometimes you think, is this really worth it? And I was in public work at the time. I worked for a university, government work, and I can't imagine, and I heard stories of some of my colleagues who were going through the same process, and then were in private practice, and what it does to their practice, their ability to bring on new clients, if they're going to create a conflict, you know, those sorts of issues. And I'm glad I didn't have to deal with those on top of everything else. So I think it was just really steeling yourself to go through that rigorous process.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being transparent about the challenges you faced. All things to be considered. We'll move into our next question. Judge Humetewa, how did practicing law prepare you for the bench?
Well, as I mentioned, I was fortunate enough to have practiced primarily before the bench on which I now serve. I was predominantly in my career a criminal attorney, and I handled everything from border crimes to violent crimes on Indian country to white collar crimes. I also had a period of time where I was a civil AUSA, and I actually did some bankruptcy work. So this also helped me not only in understanding my own bench, but the processes that were in place for the bench already, because, you know, there are certain procedures, and of course the local district court rules, I was very familiar with those. And so I kind of understood all of that. But what I wasn't prepared for really was the volume. At the time that I came on board, we had, I think, 6 vacancies that had to be filled. We actually had visiting judges from across the nation come in and help out with the load of work that was not being addressed. And so at the time we were, I think, 3rd or 4th in the nation for highest filings overall. And so I frankly was not prepared to confront the volume that we were facing. And so I think that was the biggest challenge. But in terms of preparing for the bench, really those who had not had that prior experience before, I think what they did a lot of was come into court, view proceedings, talk with some of the senior judges about the practitioners, what the process is like, and so on and so forth. I did a little bit of that in the civil arena because I hadn't practiced civil work in federal court in a few years. So I did that. I was able to view some of those proceedings and to talk to some of the senior judges about the civil workload. But that's how I prepared.
Thank you, Judge Humetewa. And Justice Welch?
Right, so I already sort of pointed out the interesting part about my labor employment background, which it is actually a lot of that is super transferable to the work, the administrative work I'm trying to do in the courts right now regarding DEI. So I'm heading up our diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, and we're still in sort of the baby step infancy, but I bring a perspective about what the private sector has been doing on this for a pretty long time, actually. So, I mean, many of my clients were really, really deep into this work in a really authentic way, or did it realize that it's not working and they have to reconfigure how they're doing the work. So I had the privilege of walking alongside them in that journey. And I have been really pleased that I'm able to bring a lot of that experience with me to this job where I'm sitting now. As far as day-to-day sort of the opinion work, obviously the core of what I do, I had a pretty robust litigation practice for the first 10 years of my practice. So obviously in court a lot, obviously the typical litigator life of, you know, depositions and briefs and appeals and all that work that many of us did. What's interesting is I don't think I even realized, even though it was a big motivator for me stepping forward, all of that non-billable work I talked about, it is actually amazing how much of that work absolutely has helped, you know, inform the work I do now. So for example, I was really active in the world of public schools in Michigan and how they work. Every state's very unique in how their schools work, but tax policy is very, very involved with how schools are funded in most places. And so I became a bit of an expert on that when I was looking at bills and doing what I could to support our schools. And there are a fair number of tax cases that come to the court. And I actually really enjoy those issues. And so that work, it's been great that that has been a transferable skill set. I also, for about 5 years, was of counsel to a criminal law practice. And I am really, really glad I did that, because the state court docket is, you know, it tips criminal. I think it's about 60% of the cases. So, and even though most of my practice wasn't that, I am very grateful I did have experience there because the learning curve would be very high. So I definitely think having both the civil and criminal for the seat I am sitting in was really, really valuable for me.
Awesome. And Judge Baker Robinson?
Okay. Well, I was a prosecutor for 13 years in Wayne County. And so I practiced in the court where I now sit. So for me, I was fortunate enough to be placed on the criminal bench. As I indicated, there was 2 spots when I ran. And Justice Mary Beth Kelly was already a visiting judge for the family court. And so the position that opened up, someone from the family court moved to civil. So the Chief Justice here, Justice Tim Kenny, he is really concerned about people being put where he thinks they're best. And because I had the criminal background and she had the civil background, we were put where we had practiced. So it was very comfortable for me starting here because again, I've been practicing here for the last 13 years. And I actually took over the docket of one of my mentors and the person who swore me in to state court. So, and he still comes in and he's still a source of information. And so that is what I did and to prepare for it. So that's it.
Awesome. And Judge Childs?
Say that being a labor and employment lawyer, in addition to the efficiencies that Justice Welch mentioned, it's such a broad practice. I mean, if you're on the advice counsel side as well as defending in that regard, I was thinking of all the agencies that it put me in front of. We were in front of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the South Carolina Human Affairs Commission, also the Department of Labor, administrative law courts, circuit courts, and then of course, federal courts. Then as I advanced on to being a deputy director for Division of Labor, I was responsible for a lot of the position statements of the agency. So I would deal with corporate America essentially in that regard as well. as a workers' comp commissioner, while we heard our own individual cases, we also served as an appellate panel for other commissioners in terms of decisions that they made. So that placed me in that tribunal as well. And then of course in circuit court, running our business court as well as our general sessions court, I had general jurisdiction. So I received a lot of cases in that regard. And then of course coming on to federal court, it's a different, higher level cases in terms of subject matter, a lot more complicated statutes and things of that nature. But definitely the volume of state court, hats off to you all, is extreme. And I remember when I came over to federal court, because we see so much on the system and we can rule from the record, state court, you tend to be more in court most days. That gave us the opportunity to actually reflect more research, more writing. We have more staff, obviously, with clerks, but we do keep the cases from beginning to end, unlike in state court where there's a huge volume. It was not uncommon for me to have 100 pleas in a week versus here, we set, the amount of matters that we would have, in federal court here, and again, determine whether or not we'll have a hearing on any given matter.
Thank you, Judge Childs. It's good to know that practice translates well to the judiciary. Judge Baker Robinson, what do you like most or least about being a judge?
What I like most is being able to influence the lives of others that come before me. That's what I like most. And praying that they take a different route and not come back before me. So that's what I like most. I don't think I've been here long enough to say I like anything least. I actually love being a judge. So I don't have a least at this point in time.
That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that, Judge Baker Robinson. And Justice Welch?
Yeah, I'm a lot like Judge Baker Robinson. I mean, the privilege of serving in this job means there's not much I don't like. But probably what's really hard, I know this is true of any judge, is obviously the issues that come before you are really hard. I mean, I see, frankly, a lot of CSC cases up on appeal. So, like that's, people say, what surprised you? Like I had no idea how many CSC cases are up on appeal. So like they're hard, sad fact patterns. Obviously we're applying the law. Sometimes I guess as an appellate judge, and obviously all of our judges have this, our commitment is to follow the law. Sometimes it's hard because you maybe don't agree. You don't love personally the outcome. You wish there was something more you could do to fix it. And as an appellate judge, I can at least write and say, hey, legislature, fix this. So I guess that's using my pen to hopefully bring attention to some important challenges in the law. So certainly, but that's both, so that means that's a plus side to the job. We can use our pen to at least bring attention to an issue that maybe the legislature isn't even aware of. The opportunity, though, to affect the system change, that because of the way our courts are structured in Michigan, we're very decentralized. And it's hard because everybody, as Judge Baker Robinson well understands, that you have to rely on your local funding unit, which is the county. And that means there's huge disparities all over the states and sort of how our courts are funded. And so, we at the Michigan Supreme Court and our administrative office are looking at that and trying to figure out how to solve that problem. So we're really in this problem solving mode, and a whole bunch of the justices care a lot about that. So that's the work I love.
Thank you, Justice Welch. And Judge Humetewa.
Well, I think what I like most about being a judge is it's very interesting because the law continues to interest me. And each case that comes before me has its own unique set of circumstances. And one would think that, well, there certainly has to be case law developed that's going to clearly answer this set of facts, but the law, as you know, continues to evolve. And so I think that's what keeps me interested, that the unique circumstances and the law that continues to evolve. So it is always stimulating to me to read the cases, read the facts, read the arguments of the parties. So that continues to keep me involved in the day-to-day operations of the chambers, and working with my law clerks, of course, is a reward in and of itself. Very brilliant, hardworking young lawyers. So I enjoy that. The hardest part, as was mentioned by the other panelists, is presiding over the criminal cases. Here in Arizona and in other similar districts, we handle violent crime cases off of Indian reservations. And we also have a great deal of border crimes, bringing in drugs and people and so on. And this inevitably means that I have to impose a sentence on an individual. That is still one of the very hardest things a judge can do. And in my case, you know, of course, I was a prosecutor for many years. I was advocating for penalties. As a judge, it's harder because you have to weigh all of the arguments and then look at the law and the unique circumstances of the individual and the victims. And so I still have not found a way to make it any easier. Some days, especially when I have a heavy criminal docket, it can be very emotionally and physically draining. And so you do have to find ways to sort of regroup after those days. And sometimes it's just, you know, talking with my law clerks or my courtroom staff, or, you know, going for a run or whatever it might be. So that's probably the most difficult thing. And the thing that I like least about being a judge is having to impose, you know, sometimes really tough sentences.
Thank you all for being transparent about the likes and dislikes and your roles in the judiciary. We'll shift gears here to discuss the topic of diversity, and we'll start with Judge Baker Robinson. Women and women of color are not proportionately represented in the judiciary. Why do you believe this is the case?
I think there are a number of reasons. One, women and women of color are not in the profession itself in a large number. So when you start with that, you're looking at a smaller amount of individuals that are in the profession. And then from that amount of women or women of color who are attorneys, then you have to pull out from the judiciary. The other issue, I think, and this is something that has to do with, we've talked about running. Running is very costly. It is a huge barrier for a lot of people of color. When you have to raise money, you have to, you know, get individuals with deep pockets to try to help you out. Many of us may only know, we may be first generation lawyers, we may be first generation college educated, at the most, maybe second. So when you're looking at fundraising, generally people give $100, maybe $200. It's not like in other groups where they can get $1,000 from one person, couple $1,000. And we may not know people who are in those positions who can do that. And so money is always a barrier when it comes to running. As Judge Childs talked about, I was apolitical too. You know, I don't come from a political family. I wasn't involved in politics in that way. So again, you don't have a name of individuals whose fathers or mothers or brothers or whomever have been senators or other judges or things. Those names in Michigan is huge. People vote on name recognition. So they may not know anything about the candidates at all, but they know the name. And so they continue to vote the same name. So with people of color who have not had one generation back to be able to say, you know, to establish a name, it's hard. So those are the barriers, and those can all be issues that you can discuss one way or the other regarding the history that we have in this country. But I think that is some of the issues that we run into, women of color being able to ascend to the judiciary.
Thank you, Judge Baker Robinson and Justice Welch.
Yeah, I've spent, I think as I've shared numerous times, I've spent a lot of times trying to support and help women and women of color in this journey because of the barriers. Because of my background of 20 years of involvement on the political side, I did get to establish a lot of those connections that Judge Baker Robinson is talking about. So I had a pretty good idea where to go and help others go and help make those connections for them. There is no question. Two big things for running for office: money and time, which a lot of busy women, at key parts of our lives, maybe you're parenting, maybe you're taking care of your parents, all the challenges we have can get in the way of any try to move forward and advance yourself professionally. But there's no question for running for office. It is, I was gone almost every night, whether virtually gone or on the road gone, pretty much for at least 6 nights a year for a year. That was my reality. So, and I was running statewide. So that meant I had to move all over the state, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to my destination every night, and then still get home because I still had my law practice going. So I was fortunate because I was able to skinny my law practice down and plan for it, and had a husband who had an income and do that. So I was able to work 60% schedule, super awkward, as Judge Childs talked about. How do you take on new clients when your clients know you're running, you're appearing in radio ads, you're on billboards, they know you're running. So I was fortunate that I had a fantastic book that stayed with me. And then I really couldn't take on much new work. So I was able to do that. Most people cannot do that. I recognize that. And that's not okay. That limits severely the pool. I, like Chandra, when she first ran, she went to some people and asked, "Are you running?" There were frankly some incredibly talented women of color who I really was hoping were going to step forward and take on this race. The timing wasn't right. They maybe had other really good jobs in the judiciary. You have to give up your seat and take a big risk. If you're on the ballot the same year, you can't run for both seats. So a lot of them were like, why would I want a job where there's this huge target, expensive target on your back every time you have to run again? We have our seats for 8 years, so that's good. But it is just me alone. Our campaign raised $1.5 million. The race total was many millions over that, but if you add up all the outside money. So that's a massive barrier and extremely intimidating. So that's where we need to have people encouraging people to step forward and basically say, I got you, I'm here for you, we will figure this out.
Thank you for sharing that, Justice Welch. And Judge Childs.
I would just indicate also that, being a first generation college graduate on both sides of the family, and we've got to work on just that pool of talent, just getting kids from middle school interested and have a pipeline in that regard. We've also got to stay the course. I noticed that with young lawyers, you might have a lot of job hopping, but are you really building skills? Are you building things that you can actually place down? I always called it getting transferable skills, that if you're going to be somewhere, what are you going to learn? What are you going to take from that experience so that you actually are elevating yourself in some regard? I was the first Black female partner in a major law firm in the state of South Carolina, year 2000. That seems long to me. I did not know it when I, had that until the newspaper wanted to write up about it. So we just got to stay the course and understand that those are the types of things. And then quite frankly, within 6 months, the governor called and then I was gone, and then had my career and never looked back. And of course, great friends with the firm who gave me that start, but you've got to be able to just kind of endure. Then there are those barriers. When I came into the position of federal court, my daughter was, I think, about one. My job, I live in Columbia, South Carolina. My job was in Greenville, 3-hour round trip commute daily for about 3 years. Law clerk drives up, I'm working in the car, then I drive back. And she had childcare at home at first. And then we had a great private school who would open early for me, to get her in and then get picked up and all. And then you go home and Of course, there's family time and things of that nature, but I see the bigger picture. I'm in Columbia in this, particular office. So you just got to realize that it's not going to be so easy just the way you would have it planned and cut out. There are going to be some challenges and things, but you've got to realize the bigger picture and how broad the experiences that you'll get and how much more committed that you'll be to the job in that regard. So just again, don't give up. Have a good family base, have a good social network support of friends and whomever that would make sure that that child got picked up, that would make sure that you had grocery shopping done, just whatever it takes. So again, don't let the barriers get in the way if this is truly a dream.
Thank you, Judge Childs. And Judge Humetewa.
So as Judge Childs was pointing out, I think the traditional pathways with regard to the pipeline have really, in some ways, foreclosed those opportunities, but there has been a shift change. So for example, the first female federal court appointed judge here in Phoenix was in 1994. And that was roughly around just after that time as well. The first female US magistrate judge was appointed. And so after that, you can kind of see this little bit of a trajectory, but in terms of numbers, let me just give you some examples. Some of this information is from our Administrative Office of US Courts. And this does not include, they don't have the data for 2019 on, but this reflects 2016 through 2018 in terms of active Article 3 judges by gender. There were 480 males and 254 females. And full-time magistrate judges by gender from fiscal year 16 through 18, there were 385 males and 235 females. And in our Ninth Circuit alone, active sitting judges, and this doesn't include those who have gone senior, there were 157 males and 58 females. And so I think that sort of shows the difference in terms of the gender makeup of the federal judiciary. But again, I think today's numbers look a little bit better. And that is because of that, sort of pipeline and the ability of people like Judge Welch to help people along in finding those doorways that open to females, female professionals, female single mothers who may want to get through law school, get a clerkship, and then go on forward. And so I think the challenges that are faced on an individual basis by a female lawyer there's so many of them. And to be able to sort of nicely break out a path is really difficult because you want to plan your family, you have to juggle, all of these daily tasks and then try to build your career upon that, as well as build those political connections if you're interested in a federal judiciary position. It's really, really daunting and very difficult. And so I'm glad there are people like those on the panel who are helping to open those doorways, and folks in the ABA and the Federal Bar Association who are giving, sort of the pathway of what looks impossible to finally look possible. So I think that hopefully we'll see more change, more positive change in the coming years.
Thank you, Judge Humetewa. And we've got about 7 minutes remaining. And so we'll get to the last question, which is, why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important to the judiciary? And we'll start with Justice Welch.
Thank you. This is, I am the justice that is working on this in Michigan. And I'll be really blunt. We have 7 justices. We are majority female, 4 women who are amazing. We are all white. And I don't think that's okay. In a state that includes Detroit, a majority minority city, which I actually hate that phrase because, you know, if you're Black, that's a majority in the city of Detroit. But I just, you know, if you look at those, you know, the percentage of demographics or whatever, our bench is not representative of our state. So that's something I care deeply about. That problem permeates the bench. It's better in certain communities, depending on where you live. So certainly there has been improvement, but we need to keep working on this. And a lot of it has to do with the barriers to entry. There's no question. Why does it matter? I cannot tell you how many forums I have been part of where a prominent lawyer, whether it's a Black female or a Hispanic male or whatever demographic someone comes from, talks about their inspiration being someone they saw. You know, somebody coming to their classroom when they were in 5th grade and talking about, I'm a judge, you know, any level judge, it didn't matter. And that it was this aha moment for those individuals. So I think it's pretty common in a lot of white America that people have those role models, or it's just not an issue. They see people that look like them all the time, whether it's in the community or on TV or wherever. So we're slowly getting better in that regard in some ways. In other ways, we've gone backwards. Some of our numbers are law firms, women partners went down, people of color went down, you know, so there's, we're you know, trying to wrangle with this problem. Ultimately, I mean, 2 things. 1, it's just the right thing to do. Everybody should be at the table. 2, if you care about democracy and you care about the courts having integrity in the community and people believing in the institution, because ultimately we're just an idea, you have to care about people feeling like the system is fair. And if the system appears to someone coming into court as if they're not represented in any way, it could feel unfair. We know this based on data. In fact, there's data in Michigan going back 40 years that was looking at this. So ultimately, to ensure a fair system that operates correctly, you need to have all voices at the table. So this is something I care deeply about, and will be using my term to do whatever I can to move the needle.
Thank you, Justice Welch. And Judge Baker Robertson.
In the interest of time, I am going to ditto that. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Baker Robertson. And Judge Humetewa.
I'm going to throw more statistics at you if you don't mind. Also, in fiscal year, according to our Administrative Office of U.S. Courts, in fiscal year 2018, there were 734 active Article III judges, of whom 63.6% were Caucasian. There were 89 were African American, 69 were Hispanic, 20 were Asian, 1 was Native American, and 3 were Pacific Islanders. And people have this question about why is it important? And I think Judge Welch mentioned it very eloquently. I think if you have a bench, especially in your community that is reflective of your community, it gives more legitimacy to, I think, the process. If you have a bench that is so overwhelmingly of one makeup, of one gender, I think it tends to distort this idea of really what fairness and equity are. And so I think it is vitally important. And I think it is extremely important for lawyers, especially those who are senior lawyers or judges, to think about it in that way, that we deal with a cross-section of America who come into our courtroom, and we have to be able to administer justice in an equal and fair way. But sometimes the individuals who step forward in your courtroom are very skeptical about whether or not they're going to get justice because of maybe the gender makeup or the racial makeup of the bench. And so that is a reality. And I think if we do have a good cross-representation of people on the bench that reflect the community, it gives more legitimacy to what's going on in the courthouse.
Thank you for that, Judge Humetewa. And Judge Childs?
She and I were chatting back and forth, and one of the questions that was in the Q&A is just about clerking. So I thought I'd switch it to that dialogue because I don't want to leave without giving you all the opportunity to perhaps apply to some of us to clerk. It is an absolutely wonderful opportunity. It gives you great research and writing responsibilities. There are many ways in which you should do it. Some apply directly. I've hired a lot of clerks who just applied to me directly. Some of us have systems where you do a resume drop at law schools and perhaps interview from that way. And then the federal courts, a lot of time, people use the Oscar online system and put in their criteria for clerking. Have a strong cover letter that indicates your interest. Make sure you are personalizing by having done some research on that judge. If you send me, dear judge, it goes in the trash because you just have no relationship with me, and I'd be surprised that people still do that. But also think about the opportunities of interning or externing for a judge. You can intern, sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not, but it's all about that experience to see what we actually do. It also helps you be a better informed lawyer. I also have externs where law students are here and they're working for a grade. And then of course you have the major positions of the law clerk in and of itself. So I do offer that opportunity. I did not have the opportunity to clerk. I ended up going with a bigger firm, but I think more people are becoming involved in that process. So please do consider it.
Thank you, Judge Childs. And we have another question from the Q&A bank. As someone, and this is directed to Judge Baker Robinson, as someone who would also not consider myself to be political, I wonder if you have suggestions for how you can build those connections and make a name for yourself.
Yes, start getting involved in your local community with the group. So for instance, if you live in a certain area and you are connected to a particular political group, start attending their meetings and becoming involved. And then usually they are part of a larger group too, and you want to just get involved that way so that you can become known in that particular group.
Thank you for that, Judge Baker Robinson. And we are just a minute past time, but I'd like to close with each of you providing your advice to young lawyers about becoming judges. And we'll start with Judge Humetewa. Oh, you're on mute, Judge.
I'm so sorry. First, I think you should, at various stages in your career, examine why it is you want the position and whether, as a litigant or a person who comes into court, would you want someone like you sitting on your case? And I think second, to really think about in the long term, approaching your career as though you are preparing for the honor of the position. In other words, are you working with professionalism? Are you involved in the community? Do you have what people would consider a judicial temperament? Are you thoughtful and are you patient? I mean, some of those skills cut against the vigorous advocacy that we're taught at law school, but really to approach your career in a way that will make you a well-rounded, but also show your work ethic, your professionalism. I think that's my advice.
Thank you for that, Judge Humetewa. And Justice Welch?
Yeah, I'll just echo Judge Humetewa. Getting involved in your community is definitely the right thing to do, but of course, being somewhat strategic. I was not. I had things I cared a lot about. So that's the first thing. If you care about something, you're going to do well with it, you know. And I served on our local, the Grand Rapids Bar Association, and I was the president of the Women Lawyers, and all the little check boxes for all the different organizations I cared a lot about with some of my dearest friends. Those social and professional connections were more vital than I ever knew they would be when I finally made the decision to step forward and run. Those networks were not only incredibly supportive of me, but they were validators because you can't know everybody. So when I stepped forward to run, my law practice had primarily been in West Michigan. people in Detroit didn't know me as an attorney. Some of them knew me because of my political work, but attorneys would call Grand Rapids and sort of check up on me, and as they should. And because of all that work, even professionals who I had not necessarily had a case against or with knew me and knew my, moral compass and ethics and temperament and all those factors that matter a lot with judges. And so that good 20 years of work really was incredibly important for when I eventually did decide to step forward and needed to build a network of support.
Thank you, Justice Welch. And Judge Baker Robinson?
Yes, I'll just briefly piggyback on what's already been said, all those things, but I really want to hone in on your character, your integrity, your civility. As has previously been said, we are kind of taught in law school to be adversarial. And when I came into, especially criminal law, when I came into criminal law, the first person who trained me was very adversarial to opposing counsel. And I learned quickly that you don't have to practice that way. You need to be knowledgeable. You can be knowledgeable and just state what the law says, and that generally will get you the decision that you want. You don't have to be adversarial and nasty. You will realize that people that are going to vote for you, most of these people will never meet you, but your reputation will travel far. And so if you're not known for having integrity or being civil or being knowledgeable, people will not support you. And I've seen it happen. So you've got to be known, especially me coming from criminal. I had to get a lot of support from the defense bar, and I actually was supported by the defense bar. So that was huge as a prosecutor. So you got to be fair. You got to be civil. You got to have integrity. You got to be knowledgeable.
Thank you, Judge Baker Robinson. And lastly, Judge Childs.
Well, I would just say that at some point you're asking someone to call you your honor. So you need to be honorable. So just think about every position that you have. Someone has blessed you in that regard, and they have given you an opportunity. So be honorable in doing the work, being well prepared, doing research, and building your skills, because at some point in time, when it's time for you to move forward, someone will need to vouch for that honor and integrity and character that we've all talked about.
Certainly. Judge Baker Robinson, Judge Childs, Judge Humetewa, and Justice Welch, the Women of Color Task Force thanks you for sharing your impactful and inspiring ascensions to your respective benches. Before we go, the Women of Color Task Force invites you to our upcoming events. November 16th at 1 p.m., we have our program, So You Want to Be a Law Professor. And on December 3rd at 1 p.m., we start our fireside chat series, which will begin with Dean Brown Lewis of North Carolina Central University Law School. Please check the ABA website's program for updates, and we thank you all for being here today.
Thank you.